The events of the War of the Ring were set in motion long before the Third Age, before the realms of men, before the awakening of the Elves, before the planting of the two trees, before even the forming of all that is. In the beginning, there was only Eru Iluvatar. It was he who gave rise to creation, and in those first moments shared with his angels a vision of all that would come to pass. Today we shall sing of these events and join in their chorus to bring the great themes of Tolkien's world to life. Welcome to the Second Age.
You can get introduced to the fascinating history of real and imagined civilizations through our sponsor, Wondrium. Wondrium offers subscription-based on-demand videos covering a huge range of subjects from history to science, travel, art, hobbies, and more. These come delivered in a variety of packages, from your more academic courses to well-produced documentaries, exclusives, and more. Their platform will be an excellent resource for those of you wishing to understand the deeper historical roots of The Lord of the Rings. For example, Tolkien was a professional philologist with a deep love of medieval legends. Wondrium has an entire lecture series on Old English language and literature, which will provide rich context for engaging with Tolkien's work. Specifically, I recommend the final episode 24, which brings it all together to analyze the impact this history has had on the modern world. My mind was blown by how many fantasy heroes, creatures, and themes can be found crawling out of the pages of ancient texts and into our own books, movies, and shows. Beyond this, Wondrium also has an ever-evolving library of content. For more exploration, you can watch Traveling the Roman Empire for a real-life journey into antiquity, or you can catch America's Great Trails, which highlights the beauty and history of the American continent. Right now, Wondrium is offering a free trial, which you can start by clicking the link in the description below or visiting wondrium.com/invicta. I highly recommend that you take a look at what they have to offer and dive into the material that you are most interested in. Enjoy!
Middle-earth is but a small part of the world of Arda, which itself has taken many forms over the millennia of its existence. The initial spark of creation was provided by the transcendent, supreme deity Eru Iluvatar. It was he who first created the angelic spirits known as the Ainur, and who instructed them on the art of heaven's music. Through this process did each of them become aware of their own embodied themes and those of their kin. Next, Iluvatar proposed to the multitude that they work together to elaborate upon a grand theme. Yet, as the chorus began their harmony, it was disrupted by the most powerful of the Ainur, he who arises in might, Melkor. Created with partial knowledge of his siblings' themes and the very thoughts of Iluvatar, he developed an impatience with the others and a yearning to bring forth his own perceived ideas. Thus, the first three themes of the Ainulindalë collapsed into a cacophony, and others of the Ainur were corrupted. Finally, Melkor's loud, vain, and endlessly repeated themes were cut short by the issuance by the creator of one chord deeper than the abyss, higher than the firmament, and piercing as the light of the eye of Iluvatar. Like a petulant child, Melkor was scolded. His rage only grew when Iluvatar showed the Ainur a vision of how their great music could together bring about the birth, life, and death of the universe. In doing so, Melkor now realized that all his destructive attempts at independence were but an anticipated part of the grand scheme of Iluvatar. When the vision ended, the Ainur were left with but faint memories of what had been shown. Even still, all were enraptured by the prospect of bringing it to life. At this point, Iluvatar called forth from the void Ea, all that is, and gave the Ainur the ability to descend into the unformed universe. Thus, Arda bubbled with activity. The most powerful of the Ainur, known as the Valar, had the greatest hand to play in its transformation. Chief among them were Manwë, Ulmo, Aule, and Melkor. Through their efforts and the support of lesser Valar, known as Maiar, did a primitive Earth take form. But as had occurred with Heaven's chorus, not all of creation was concordant. While most of the Valar and Maiar worked to prepare the world for the foresung coming of the children of Iluvatar, Melkor strove to counteract them, precipitating the first war of the universe. It is as a result of these struggles that Arda took its first form, with the Valar settling in Aman to the west and Melkor settling in Middle-earth to the east. At this point, the world was cast in darkness until the Valar Yavanna sung into existence two light-giving trees, Silver Tapirion and Golden Laurelin. Together, they illuminated the lands of Aman. Thus began the first year of the trees, and yet it was far from their light that the first children of Iluvatar awoke over 1,000 years later. Upon the shores of Lake Cuiviénen in the east of Middle-earth, the Elves stirred to life. With only the stars to grant them vision, they began to take their first steps in the world, maturing in terms of survival, culture, and language. The First Age had begun. Melkor was the first to discover them. Some were captured or slain, while the rest were driven into hiding. Eventually, they would be discovered by the Valar, who now waged a war upon Melkor to protect these firstborn. The War of the Powers saw the great hosts of both sides clash in a titanic battle, which eventually saw Melkor captured and brought back in the chains of Angainor to be imprisoned in the halls of Mandos within Valinor. Peace returned to Arda. The Elves were now invited to join the Valar in the light of Aman. Many went willingly, yet others remained behind, in fear of the terrible power which had been unleashed in the war. This sundering of the Elves would be a defining moment for all the descendants of Iluvatar's firstborn. Those who stayed behind under the stars were called the Morroquendi, or the Elves of Darkness. The Avari were those who refused the journey entirely. The Nandor were those who made it as far as the woodlands to the east of the Misty Mountains. And the Sindar were those who stopped in the coastal regions of Baleriand. Those who made it all the way to Aman were known as the Calaquendi, or the Elves of Light. They included the Vanyar under King Ingwe, the Noldor under King Finwë, and the Falmari under King Olwe. Over the following years, the Elves, blessed with natural fortitude and immortality, would begin to populate their respective corners of Arda. They sired great lines, built large cities, and developed impressive cultures. The Elves of Aman did so under the direct guidance of the Valar, and thus rose to the greatest heights. Soon, they would be joined in Arda by the awakening of the Dwarves, whose 7 fathers would go on to serve as kings of their respective clans. However, this period of peace and prosperity would not last. 300 years after his capture, a repentant Melkor would be pardoned by the Valar. But no sooner had he been released than his hands turned to mischief. This time, however, his methods of ruination proved more subtle. Taking the form of an elf, he mounted a campaign of whispers and manipulation, which brought about dissent among their ranks. As hostilities grew, brother turned on brother, and many even grew distrustful of the Valar. In response, a grand banquet was called to mend the peace. However, at this precise moment, Melkor now made his move openly. Together with Ungoliant, spawn of the Void, the pair drained the life of the two Trees of Valinor, plunging the world into darkness. The assailants then sacked the city of Formenos, plundering its treasures, slaying Finwë, and escaping to Middle-earth with the precious Silmarils. Feanor, eldest son of the slain Finwë and creator of the Silmarils, now pledged an oath of vengeance and led the Noldor in a campaign against the Dark Enemy. This would be a pivotal moment in history. At first, the Valar refused to intercede, leaving the Elves to mount the offensive themselves. The bullheadedness of their advance led to many tragedies, such as the kinslaying of Aquilond, where the Telfari were slaughtered in the hasty process of commandeering their vessels for the journey. This gravest of sins would stain the expedition. As it sailed to Middle-earth, the Valar passed judgment upon them in the doom of Mandos. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you, and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor, the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away their very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason, shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Upon hearing this, some elves returned immediately to seek repentance, while the remainder of the Noldor pressed on. Terrible woes accompanied their journeys, and the conflict to defeat Melkor soon spiraled into the multi-century War of the Jewels. During this time, many new kingdoms would be formed by the elves, as well as by the men, who awoke in the year 1500, alongside the creation of the sun and the moon. But the arrival of man was less than idyllic. Unlike the firstborn, they had short lifespans and grew up in a time of quarrel. In this chaotic environment, many took the side of the elves, while others attempted to remain neutral or were corrupted by Melkor to join his side. The next 5 centuries brought with them convulsive periods of escalating violence between the various factions. In the darkest hours of the conflict, the hosts of Melkor brought ruin as orcs, bullrogs, plagues, volcanoes, and all manner of other forces were unleashed upon the land. One by one, the kingdoms of men and elves fell. The enemy's dominion of Middle-earth was nearly complete. However, the Valar would finally be persuaded to join the cause in what became known as the War of Wrath. The battles which ensued over the following decades were the largest, bloodiest, and most destructive in the history of Arda. Following the war's climax, Melkor would be utterly defeated, beheaded by the Valar, and thrust through the door of night into the void. In his wake, much of the world was left in ruin as the entire landmass of Baleriand sunk into the sea. Though tendrils of evil still survived, including Melkor's lieutenant Sauron and several of the Bullrogs, they now retreated into the dark recesses of the earth. Likewise, many elves also withdrew from Middle-earth, sailing west to rejoin the Valar in Aman. Yet some of their kind remained behind to tend to the land alongside the races of men and dwarves. Thus ended the First Age. These are the histories recorded by the ancestors and those who still remember their passing. Now, let us explore the world of Middle-earth in the Second Age of our time. Though scarred by the past, these lands have begun to heal. To the northwest lies the coastal region of Lindon. It is here that the High King Gil-galad rules over the Elves and their important settlements of Harland, Forland, and the Grey Havens. He is joined by Elrond, who acts as his chief captain and herald. In days gone by, the Elves had once lived closely alongside the dwarves of the Blue Mountains. However, their halls were destroyed during the sinking of Baleriand and now lay abandoned. To the east extends the weathered hill country of Eriador. Its lands are home to various tribes of middlemen. Among them lies the elven kingdom of Eregion, which is ruled by Galadriel and Celeborn, from their capital of Ost-in-Edhil. Nestled against the foothills of the Misty Mountains, they maintain cordial relations with the neighboring dwarfs. Of particular note in this regard is the vast underground realm of Khazad-dûm, later known as Moria, ruled by Durin's folk. It is the most famed of all the dwarven realms, owing to its splendid halls, rich mines, and skilled craftsmen. Yet far below, beneath even the deepest holds, exist primordial caverns shrouded in perpetual darkness and gnawed by nameless things. Beyond the Misty Mountains lie the vast forests along the Anduin Valley. These had long been populated by the elven clans which had not made the original journey to Aman, and which now mingled to form the Sylvan Elves. Following the calamitous events of the War of Wrath, they were joined by various elven refugees. Among them was the Sindarin prince Orifer, who was soon made king of the Woodland Realm, and later Amdir, who was made king of Lorien. Around these regions of Rhovanion exist yet more clans of men and enclaves of dwarves. Notably, the two have established symbiotic relations to resist the greater threat of orcs and Morgoth's creatures in the wilder regions. To the north stretches a vast chain of mountains, and beyond them the frigid wastes of Forodwaith, where strange folk and stranger beasts lurk. The east, meanwhile, is a wide expanse marked by the course of the river Running, which spills into the Sea of Run. Little is known of these lands beyond the hostility of the various tribes of man which fell to the influence of the Dark Lord. Turning south, one may follow the life-giving flow of the great Anduin River down into the Bay of Belfalas. Here, the regions of Calenardon and the White Mountains are sparsely populated, save for a few settlements and lingering bands of Druidane, while the coastal regions tempt new colonists from other lands. Further south lie the lands of Harad and Khand, which also boast tribes of men. These lie in the shadow of Mordor, whose volcanic lands have long remained uninhabitable. But we would be remiss not to extend our gaze beyond the shores of Middle-earth, for it is here, in the midst of the great sea of Belegare, that one will find the island of Elenna. Following the calamitous War of Wrath, the Valar had seen fit to raise this new land as a gift to the houses of men who had aided in the defeat of Melkor. Those who followed the Star of Eärendil to take up this new mantle were also granted extended life, along with increased wisdom and physical traits. They and their descendants would come to be known as the Numenoreans. The kingdom of Numenor was first populated by a wide range of human refugees from Middle-earth. Chief among them was the half-elven Lord Elros and brother of Elrond, who had chosen the life of a mortal. He was crowned Tar Miniatur in the new capital city of Armenelos in the year 32 of the Second Age. Over the following centuries, he would oversee the kingdom's flourishing. This was in large part made possible by the geographic and ecological gifts of the island. At its center stood the holy mountain Meneltama, the pillar of heaven which dominated the island. From its high, flattened peak, one could almost see the distant shores of Aman, and it would be from here that the kings of Numenor made their ritual worship to Iluvatar. From its sides descended rolling foothills which extended to the five-pointed peninsulas. The interior was rich in fertile grassland and bountiful woodland, which teemed with all manner of plants and animals. Their great wealth was owed to the nurturing of Valar Yavanna and the Elves of Aman, who brought many specimens found nowhere else in Middle-earth. The coasts, meanwhile, were also bountiful sources of wildlife, while the deeper ocean beyond hosted many great shoals of fish. Thus it was that the Numenoreans quickly flourished. Soon, they had established major cities across the 5 districts of the island. Most notable among them was the capital of Armenelos, with its royal palace and vast structures reportedly wrought with the assistance of the Maiar. The western port of Anduin flourished in the early years as a host city for the arrival of elves from Aman, while in later years the eastern port of Romena would gain prominence as the Numenoreans turned their gaze towards Middle-earth. Historically speaking, this would occur in the 5th and 6th centuries of the Second Age as the sailors of the island ventured further and further afield. Yet the Numenoreans had been barred by the Valar from sailing west beyond the sites of the island, leaving their most enterprising captains to instead journey ever further in the opposite direction. Eventually, in the year 600, the first ship would reach Middle-earth. This event set off a whirlwind of activity. Soon more expeditions were launched. In the words of the lore master Pengalod, they sailed, quote, from the darkness of the north to the heats of the south, and beyond the south to the nether darkness, and they came even into the inner seas and sailed about Middle-earth, and glimpsed from their high prows the gates of morning in the east. The initial phase of this golden age of exploration saw the Numenoreans establish colonies on the mainland and rekindle their ancient bonds of friendship with the men, dwarves, and elves their ancestors had long ago left behind. The exchange was at first quite fruitful, as these new high men were able to both instruct the ranks of their lesser brethren whilst also learning much from the elves. The next phase of their involvement in Middle-earth, however, would prove transformative as they participated in the struggles against the rise of Sauron. Yet in their greatest moments of triumph came the seeds of defeat. The Numenoreans, realizing they were unmatched in strength, now began to see themselves as the rightful masters of the land. They became more exploitative in their dealings with Middle-earth, with eyes turned to greed and empire. They cut down endless forests and quarried vast mines for the construction of ever grander fleets and regal cities, whilst sailing home not just with gifts, but now tribute, taxes, and loot. But most pernicious of all would be the jealousy of immortality that they brought home. To once again quote Pengalod, "But the fear of death grew ever darker upon them, and they delayed it by all means that they could, and they began to build great houses for their dead, while their wise men labored unceasingly to discover the secret of recalling life, or at least the prolonging of men's days. This obsession grew ever stronger with each passing generation. Over time, it brought about resentment, distrust, and eventually outright hatred of the Elves and even of the Valar, who would not cure them of their mortality. Such was the festering nature of this psychological wound that it would ultimately rupture the fabric of Numenorean society. Though wise and far-seeing leaders would attempt to right the ship, none were prepared for what was to come. I hope you've appreciated our exploration of the incredible works of Tolkien and found it useful as a primer for a deeper dive into the material. What topics would you like to see us cover next? Be sure to head on over to our Patreon to participate in polls, catch script previews, and get HD downloads of all our art. The wonderful maps for this episode are also available for purchase on our store, so check it out. We owe a huge debt to our current patrons for funding the channel and to our researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.